The stagecoach was leaving in 3 hours, and Maggie Ellis had already made her choice, until 12-year-old Will Irwin gripped her hand at midnight and whispered the words that would haunt her forever. "If you leave tomorrow, I'll never sleep again." His father stood in the doorway, silent as stone, but his eyes told a different story. In that moment, she realized, sometimes the hardest goodbyes aren't the ones you say, they're the ones you can't. Stay with me until the end, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The Montana sky burned copper and gold as the sun descended behind the Bitterroot Mountains, painting Timber Creek in shades of ending. Maggie Ellis stood at her bedroom window in Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, watching the light fade as she folded her last cotton dress into the worn carpet bag that had carried her across 3 states and into this valley 6 months ago. Her hands trembled, not from the chill that crept through the cracked window pane, but from the weight of what morning would bring. She was leaving. The decision had been made 2 weeks ago when her sister Claire's letter arrived, the ink smudged with what Maggie suspected were tears. Thomas is gone. Pneumonia took him in 4 days. The children ask for you constantly. The farm is too much for me alone. Please, Margaret, I need you. Duty, Maggie had learned early in life, was not a choice but a calling, and when your widowed sister with 3 children under 8 years old begged for help, you answered. You packed your bags, you said your goodbyes, and you climbed aboard the eastbound stage, no matter what or who you left behind. But knowing what you had to do and accepting it were 2 different things entirely. You're really going through with it, then? Maggie turned to find Martha Henderson standing in the doorway, her weathered face creased with concern. The boarding house keeper had become something of a mother figure these past months, filling a void Maggie hadn't realized she carried since her own mother's death 5 years prior. I have to, Maggie said quietly, returning to her packing. She picked up the small wooden horse that sat on her nightstand, a gift from Will Irwin, carved with painstaking 12-year-old effort, one leg slightly shorter than the others. Her throat tightened. Clara needs me. And what about what you need? Martha moved into the room, her skirts rustling. What about what that boy needs, what his father needs? Martha, don't you Martha me, girl. The older woman's voice was sharp, but not unkind. I've watched you these 6 months. Watched you bring that ranch house back to life. Watched that man remember how to smile. Watched that child sleep through the night for the first time since his mother died. And now you're just going to walk away? Maggie's fingers tightened around the wooden horse until its edges bit into her palm. It's not that simple. Isn't it? No. The word came out sharper than intended. Maggie set the horse down carefully, forcing herself to breathe. No, it's not. Clara is my sister. She's alone with 3 children and a failing farm. What kind of person would I be if I turned my back on her? And what kind of person are you if you turn your back on them? The question hung in the air between them, heavy as storm clouds. Outside, the evening bells from the church began to toll, 6 chimes marking the supper hour. Somewhere across town, Maggie knew, Ethan Irwin was probably sitting at his kitchen table trying to convince his son to eat something. Will had barely touched his food for days, not since he'd learned she was leaving. The gossip has already started, Maggie said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. She moved to the window again, looking down at the dusty main street where a few townspeople still lingered outside the general store. Mrs. Crawford saw me riding out to the ranch last Thursday. By Friday afternoon, half the town was whispering about the school teacher spending time alone with the widowed rancher. By Sunday, Reverend Thomas pulled me aside after service to remind me of the appearance of impropriety. Martha snorted. Prudence Crawford wouldn't recognize propriety if it bit her on her self-righteous behind. And as for Thomas, he's so worried about appearances, he can't see the truth even when it's staring him in the face. The truth? Maggie turned back to face her. What truth is that? That Ethan Irwin is a good man who lost his way when Rebecca died. That his son was drowning in grief until you came along. That you've given them both something to live for again. Martha crossed the room and took Maggie's hands in her own calloused ones. And that you're running scared because you finally found something worth staying for. The words hit harder than Maggie wanted to admit. She pulled her hands away, returning to her packing with renewed determination. I'm not running. I'm doing what's right. Right for who? Before Maggie could answer, a sound from the street below made them both freeze. Footsteps on the wooden boardwalk, rapid and urgent. Then the boarding house door burst open downstairs, and a young voice called out, breathless, desperate, achingly familiar. "Mrs. Henderson, is Miss Ellis here? I need to see her." "Will?" Maggie's heart lurched. She moved toward the bedroom door, but Martha caught her arm. "You sure you want to do this tonight?" the older woman asked softly. "It might be easier on the boy if you just slip away in the morning." "Easier for him or for me?" Maggie pulled free gently. "I won't leave without saying goodbye. I won't do that to him." She descended the narrow stairs, each step feeling like a small surrender. Will stood in the entrance hall, his shirt untucked and his dark hair wild, as if he'd run the entire mile from the ranch into town. His chest heaved with exertion, and his eyes, those striking blue eyes so like his father's, were bright with unshed tears. "Will?" Maggie said gently, reaching the bottom of the stairs. "What are you doing here? It's nearly dark. Does your father know?" "You can't go." The words tumbled out of him in a rush. "You can't leave tomorrow. Please, Miss Ellis. You can't." Maggie's chest constricted. She glanced up at Martha, who had followed her down and now stood at the top of the stairs. Her expression pained. Then she looked back at the boy who had somehow, impossibly, carved out a space in her carefully guarded heart. "Will, we talked about this." "No, you talked. You told me you were leaving, but you didn't ask me. You didn't ask if I wanted you to go." He took a step toward her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "And I don't. I don't want you to leave. I don't want you to ever leave." "Sweetheart," the endearment slipped out before she could stop it, and she saw Will's face crumple slightly at the word. She knelt down so they were eye to eye, fighting to keep her own emotions in check. "I know this is hard, but my sister needs me. She has 3 little children and no one to help her, and I'm the only family she has left." "What about Pa? What about me?" Will's voice cracked. "Aren't we your family too?" The question pierced straight through her carefully constructed defenses. "Will, you know I care about you and your father very much, but then why are you leaving?" Tears spilled over now, tracking down his sun-browned cheeks. "Ma left because she got sick. She didn't have a choice. But you do have a choice, and you're choosing to go anyway. You're choosing to leave us just like she did." "Will Irwin, that's not fair. I don't care if it's fair." He was shouting now, his whole body shaking. "Nothing's fair. Nothing's been fair since Ma died. And just when things were getting better, just when Pa was smiling again, and I could sleep without having nightmares, you're leaving too. Everyone leaves." The words echoed through the small entrance hall, raw and devastating. Maggie reached for him, but he stumbled back, swiping at his eyes with his sleeve. "Will, I told Pa not to let himself care about you. I told him it was dangerous because you'd probably leave like everyone else does. But he didn't listen, and I didn't listen either because I wanted—" His voice broke completely. "I wanted you to be my Ma. Not instead of Ma, but another Ma. Is that wrong? Is that why you're leaving?" "Oh, sweetheart, no." Maggie couldn't hold back anymore. She pulled him into her arms, and after a moment of resistance, he collapsed against her, his thin shoulders shaking with sobs. "That's not wrong. That's not wrong at all." "Then stay." His voice was muffled against her shoulder. "Please stay." Behind them, the front door opened again, bringing with it a gust of cool evening air and the sound of heavier footsteps. Maggie looked up to see Ethan Irwin standing in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his face etched with a weariness that went bone deep. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his gaze moving from his son to Maggie. "I woke up and found him gone. I should have known he'd come here." Maggie stood slowly, keeping one hand on Will's shoulder. The boy didn't move away, but he didn't look at his father either. "It's all right. We were just—" She stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. Ethan stepped fully inside, closing the door behind him. He was still in his work clothes, dusty trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His dark hair needed cutting, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He looked exhausted. He looked heartbroken. He looked exactly how Maggie felt. "Will," he said gently, "it's time to go home." No. Son, I said no. Will pulled away from Maggie, turning to face his father with defiant tears still streaming down his face. I'm not leaving until she promises to stay. Will, you can't. Ethan's voice was strained. You can't ask her to give up her family for us. That's not fair to her. I don't care about fair. I care about. Will's voice cracked again. I care about her. Don't you? The question hung in the air like a held breath. Ethan's eyes met Maggie's over his son's head, and in that look she saw everything he hadn't said in the months since she'd started coming to the ranch. Everything he'd kept carefully locked away behind walls of propriety and grief and fear of being hurt again. Yes, Ethan said finally, his voice rough. Yes, I care about her. Very much. The admission seemed to cost him something. He looked away, his jaw tight. Which is why I'm not going to ask her to stay. Her sister needs her, Will. She has responsibilities. And we'll be all right. We were all right before she came, and we'll be all right after she leaves. That's a lie. Will's voice was quiet now, almost eerie in its flatness. We weren't all right before. You barely talked. You barely ate. You worked yourself until you couldn't stand up straight, and you still couldn't sleep. And I had nightmares every single night about Ma dying, about watching her get weaker and weaker until she was just gone. Will, Ethan's voice broke. And then Miss Ellis came, Will continued, looking between his father and Maggie. And she started teaching me in school, and she was so patient when I couldn't read the words right. And then one day she asked if she could visit the ranch, and you said yes even though I could tell you were scared. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, things got better. He turned to Maggie, his eyes pleading. You taught me to read, Miss Ellis. Really read, not just sound out the words. You helped Pa fix the broken step on the porch that Ma always wanted fixed. You brought wildflowers and put them in Ma's vases, and instead of making Pa sad, it made him smile. You told me stories about your childhood, and you listened when I told you about Ma. You didn't try to make me stop missing her. You were there. Maggie's vision blurred with tears. She wanted to speak, to say something that would make this easier, but her throat had closed up completely. And Pa, Will said, turning back to his father, tell her how you've been different since she started coming around. Tell her about how you started caring about things again. Tell her, his voice dropped to a whisper. Tell her you love her, because I know you do. I can see it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan stood frozen, his knuckles white where he gripped his hat. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. It doesn't matter what I feel. She has a sister who needs her. Responsibilities that... Don't hide behind my responsibilities, Ethan. The words came out sharper than Maggie intended, fueled by frustration and heartache and the terrible, wonderful truth of what Will had just said. If you have something to say to me, say it. Ethan's eyes snapped to hers, and for a moment she saw the careful control slip, saw the raw emotion beneath. What good would it do? You're leaving tomorrow. Saying it now would just make it harder. Harder than this? Maggie gestured between them, at Will standing there watching them both with desperate hope written across his young face. Harder than pretending we're all fine with this? Harder than lying to ourselves and each other? I'm not lying. Then what do you call it? Maggie took a step toward him, her own walls crumbling. These past 3 months, Ethan. Every Sunday dinner, every evening on the porch after Will went to bed, every conversation that lasted until the stars came out, every time you looked at me like I was something precious, something worth... She stopped, forcing herself to breathe. Was any of that real? Or was I just convenient? Someone to help with your son and make your house feel less empty? You know that's not true. Ethan's voice was low, urgent. He moved closer, and she could see the pain etched in every line of his face. You know you're more than that. So much more. Then tell me. The tears came now, hot and fast. Tell me what I am to you. Because I need to know, Ethan. I need to know if walking away tomorrow is the right thing to do, or if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. The words hung in the air between them, raw and desperate. Martha, still standing at the top of the stairs, quietly slipped away, giving them what privacy she could. Will looked between his father and Maggie, holding his breath. Ethan set his hat down on the small table by the door. When he looked up at Maggie again, his blue eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You want to know what you are to me?" he asked quietly. "You're the reason I get up in the morning. You're the reason I care about fixing the ranch house, about planning for next year's harvest, about any kind of future at all. When Rebecca died, I thought I buried my heart with her. I thought I'd never, could never, feel anything like that again." He took another step closer, close enough now that Maggie could see the gold flecks in his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands. "And then you walked into our lives with your books, and your kindness, and your laughter, and suddenly the house didn't feel so empty anymore. Suddenly I was thinking about things I hadn't thought about in 2 years, wondering if it was too late to plant roses by the porch like Rebecca always wanted, caring about whether my shirt was clean when you came for supper, lying awake at night thinking about the way you smiled at something Will said, or how the lamplight caught in your hair." Maggie's breath caught. "Ethan, I'm not done." His voice was rough but steady. "You asked me to tell you what you are to me, and I'm telling you. You're hope, Maggie. You're the future I thought I'd lost. You're every good morning and every peaceful evening. You're the sound of laughter in my house again. You're the reason my son sleeps through the night. And you're—" He stopped, his jaw working as if the next words physically hurt to say. "You're the woman I'm in love with, the woman I want to build a life with, the woman I want to wake up next to for whatever years God grants me." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Maggie felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her shoulders. "But," Ethan continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "I also know you have a sister who needs you, children who are counting on you, responsibilities that matter, and I can't ask you to choose us over them. I won't be the man who makes you live with that kind of guilt, that kind of regret." He picked up his hat again, settling it on his head with hands that trembled slightly. "So we'll be at the livery tomorrow morning. We'll see you off properly. We'll say our goodbyes the right way. And then you'll get on that stage and you'll go to your sister and you'll do what needs to be done. Because that's who you are, Maggie. That's one of the things I love about you. You do what's right, even when it costs you everything." He turned toward Will, reaching out a hand. "Come on, son. It's time to let Miss Ellis finish her packing." But Will didn't move. He stood there, looking at Maggie with an expression far too old for his 12 years. "Is he right?" the boy asked quietly. "Do you have to go, or do you want to go?" "Will," Ethan started. "No, Pa. It's a fair question." Will kept his eyes on Maggie. "Because if you have to go, if your sister really needs you and there's no other way, then I'll understand. I won't like it, but I'll understand. But if you're going because you think you should, or because you're scared, or because the town gossips won't leave you alone," he took a shaky breath, "then I think you should know something. I think you should know that if you leave tomorrow, I don't think I'll ever sleep right again. Not because I'm trying to make you feel guilty, but because it's true. When you're here, I feel safe. When you're here, I can close my eyes and not see Ma dying. I can dream about good things instead of scary things. And I think Pa feels the same way, even if he won't say it." "Will, that's enough." Ethan's voice was strained. "You can't put that kind of burden on her." "I'm not trying to burden her. I'm just telling her the truth." Will looked at his father. "Someone should. Because tomorrow morning, when that stage pulls away, it's going to be too late. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering if we should have fought harder to make her stay." The boy turned back to Maggie, and she saw tears threatening to spill over again. "I know it's selfish. I know you have other people who need you, but Pa and me, we need you too. And I think maybe you need us. So I'm asking you one more time, not because I want to make you feel bad, but because I think you deserve to know. Please don't go. Please don't leave us. Please stay." The final word broke on a sob, and this time when Maggie reached for him, he came willingly, burying his face against her shoulder. She held him tight, her own tears falling freely now, and over his head she met Ethan's eyes. The man she'd come to love stood there in the dim entrance hall, his own face wet with tears he wasn't even trying to hide anymore, and in that moment Maggie felt something shift inside her, felt the careful reasoning and sense of duty that had governed her whole life crack and splinter under the weight of a different kind of truth. She did need them, as much as they needed her, maybe more. "I can't promise anything," she heard herself say, her voice muffled against Will's hair. I need time to think, to figure out if there's another way." Will pulled back just enough to look at her, hope blazing in his tear-stained face. "You mean you might stay?" "I mean I need to think." Maggie gently cupped his face, wiping away his tears with her thumbs. "Go home with your father. Let me have tonight to figure things out. And tomorrow morning," she took a shaky breath, "tomorrow morning I'll give you my answer. Either way, I'll give you my answer. I promise." It wasn't the answer Will wanted. She could see that in his face. But it was all she could give right now, with her heart and her head warring inside her chest, with duty pulling one way and love pulling another. "All right," Will said finally, his voice small. "But promise you won't leave without saying goodbye. Even if you decide to go, promise you won't just disappear." "I promise." Maggie kissed his forehead, breathing in the scent of hay and sunshine that clung to him. "I won't leave without saying goodbye." Ethan moved forward then, gently pulling his son back. "Come on, Will. Let's get you home and into bed." He looked at Maggie, and in his eyes she saw gratitude mixed with resignation, hope mixed with heartbreak. "Thank you for everything." He didn't wait for a response. He guided Will toward the door, and Maggie watched them go, feeling like every step they took away from her carved out a piece of her heart. At the threshold, Will turned back one more time. "Tomorrow," he said simply. "You promised." "Tomorrow," Maggie confirmed, her voice thick with tears. And then they were gone, the door closing behind them with a soft click that sounded like an ending. Maggie stood alone in the entrance hall, listening to their footsteps fade down the boardwalk, listening to the distant sound of a horse being mounted, and then the rhythmic clop of hooves moving away into the night. "Well," Martha said from the top of the stairs, making Maggie jump. She'd forgotten the older woman was still there. "That was quite a scene." Maggie turned to look up at her, feeling wrung out and exhausted and more confused than she'd ever been in her life. "I don't know what to do, Martha." "Don't you?" The older woman descended the stairs slowly, her expression kind but knowing. "Seems to me you knew the moment that boy asked you to stay, maybe even before that. You're just scared to admit it." "Of course I'm scared." The words burst out of Maggie like a dam breaking. "I'm terrified. What if I stay and it doesn't work out? What if the town never accepts us? What if something happens to Ethan and I lose him too? What if Will grows up resenting me for trying to replace his mother? What if my sister never forgives me? What if I'm making a mistake that ruins everyone's lives?" Martha waited until the flood of words subsided, then reached out and took Maggie's hands in hers. "What if you go? What if you spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? What if you let fear steal your chance at happiness? What if tomorrow you get on that stage and realize 5 miles down the road that you left your heart behind?" "But Clara is a grown woman with friends and neighbors. Clara has options, and more than that." Martha squeezed her hands gently. "Clara would want you to be happy. You know she would. She'd never want you to sacrifice your own future out of guilt." "How do you know?" "Because she's your sister. Because she loves you." Martha smiled sadly. "Write to her. Explain. Offer to send money to hire help on the farm. But don't throw away your chance at love because you think it's what you're supposed to do." Maggie pulled her hands away, moving to the window. Outside, the street was dark now, lit only by the occasional lamp in a window. Somewhere out there, Ethan and Will were riding back to the ranch, back to the empty house that had slowly become full again over the past 6 months, back to the life she'd become part of without even realizing it. "I don't know how to choose," she whispered. "Then don't choose with your head." Martha came to stand beside her. "Choose with your heart. What does your heart want, Maggie?" The answer came swift and sure, rising up from a place deep inside her that she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. "I want to stay. I want to wake up to Will's laughter and Ethan's smile. I want to teach school and ride out to the ranch for supper. I want to help Will with his reading and fix up the ranch house and plant roses by the porch. I want a future that looks like this, full of love and laughter and family. I want to stay. I want to stay, she said aloud, and the words felt like truth, like rightness, like coming home. But even as she said them, guilt twisted in her stomach. Clara, the children, the farm, the responsibilities she'd been raised to honor above all else. Could she really turn her back on all of that? Martha seemed to read her thoughts. Go upstairs, write your sister a letter, tell her the truth, all of it, and then see what she says. Maybe there's a solution you haven't thought of yet. Maggie nodded slowly. It was a reasonable suggestion. More than that, it was a lifeline, a way to honor both her heart and her duty. She climbed the stairs to her room, lit the lamp on her small writing desk, and pulled out paper and pen. For a long moment, she sat there, staring at the blank page. Then with a trembling hand, she began to write. Dearest Clara. The words poured out of her, all the truth she'd been holding back. The grief and loneliness that had defined her life since their parents died. The unexpected joy she'd found in Timber Creek. The man and the boy who had become her family. The impossible choice she faced. I know you need me, she wrote, and I know I promised to come. But I have to be honest with you, dear sister. I know I've fallen in love. And more than that, I think I've found where I'm meant to be. I can send money to hire help for the farm. I can write letters and visit when I'm able. But if I leave tomorrow, I think I'll be leaving my heart behind. And I'm not sure I can live with that. Please understand. Please forgive me. Please tell me I'm not a terrible person for wanting to stay. She signed it, sealed it, and sat back, feeling simultaneously lighter and heavier. Tomorrow she would send it. Tomorrow she would... A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, she called. Martha entered, carrying a tray with tea and bread. Thought you might need something. She set the tray down on the bedside table, then noticed the sealed letter on the desk. You wrote to her? Yes. Maggie picked up the letter, running her thumb over the wax seal. Though I'm not sure what good it will do. It won't reach her for at least a week, and I have to give Ethan and Will my answer tomorrow morning. Martha was quiet for a moment, then asked carefully, And what will that answer be? Maggie looked down at the letter in her hands, at the future it represented. Then she looked at her packed carpet bag sitting by the door, at the different future that represented. 2 paths, 2 lives, 1 impossible choice. But as she sat there in the lamplight, with the memory of Will's tears and Ethan's confession still echoing in her ears, she realized something. The choice wasn't actually that difficult at all. Her heart had already decided. Her head just needed to catch up. I don't know yet, she lied, because saying it out loud felt too terrifying, too final. I'll decide by morning. But she did know. Deep down, in the place where truth lived, she knew exactly what her answer would be. She just hoped it was the right one. As Martha left and Maggie prepared for bed, the clock on the mantel chimed midnight. In 7 hours, the stage would arrive. In 8 hours, it would leave. And somewhere between now and then, Maggie Ellis would have to find the courage to follow her heart, wherever it might lead. Outside her window, the Montana stars blazed cold and bright, indifferent to human struggles, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in the valley below. But if Maggie had looked up at them in that moment, she might have seen what the stars had always known, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay. The question was, did she have that kind of courage? Morning would tell. Maggie didn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, watching the shadows shift across her ceiling as the hours crawled by, her mind replaying every moment of the evening. Will's desperate plea, Ethan's raw confession, the impossible weight of choosing between duty and desire, between the family that needed her and the family she'd found. At 4 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely. She rose, dressed in the gray traveling suit she'd laid out the night before, and sat at her window watching the sky slowly lighten from black to deep blue to that particular shade of dawn gold that only existed in Montana. The town below was still quiet, just a few early risers beginning their day, the baker lighting his ovens, old Mr. Peterson opening his livery stable, a rooster crowing somewhere in the distance. The stage was due at 8. She had 4 hours. Her carpetbag sat by the door, packed and ready. Next to it on the small table sat the letter to Clara, sealed but not yet posted. 2 futures, waiting. 2 choices, demanding to be made. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Maggie? Martha's voice came through the door. I saw your light. May I come in? Yes? The older woman entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, the steam rising in the cool morning air. She handed one to Maggie and settled into the chair by the window, studying her face in the growing light. You didn't sleep, Martha observed. No. Did you decide? Maggie wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting the heat seep into her cold fingers. I think I decided the moment Will asked me to stay. I don't know if I have the courage to actually do it. To stay? To choose myself. The words came out barely above a whisper. My whole life, Martha, I've done what was expected, what was proper, what was right. When Mother died, I took care of Father. When Father died, I took care of Clara. When Clara married Thomas, I taught school to support myself and send money home. I've never, not once, chosen what I wanted over what I should do. Martha was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee. Then she said, And what do you want, Maggie? Right now, in this moment, if there were no expectations, no duty, no guilt, what would you choose? The answer rose up swift and sure. I'd stay. I'd go to that livery at 8 o'clock, and I'd tell Ethan yes. I'd tell Will he never has to worry about me leaving again. I'd write to Clara and explain, and I'd send her every penny I could spare to hire help. I'd teach at the school and ride out to the ranch for supper, and her voice cracked. And I'd let myself be happy. Just once in my life, I'd choose to be happy. Then do it. But what if... No. Martha set down her cup with a firm click. No more what-ifs, no more borrowing trouble from tomorrow. You want to know what I think? I think Clara will understand. I think she'll be hurt at first, yes, but she'll understand because she loves you and she wants you to be happy. And even if she doesn't understand right away, even if it takes time, you can't live your whole life for other people's happiness, Maggie. At some point, you have to choose your own. Maggie felt tears prick at her eyes. What if I'm making a mistake? What if you're not? Martha reached over and took her hand. What if this is exactly what you're supposed to do? What if walking away from Ethan and Will is the real mistake? You won't know unless you're brave enough to find out. The words settled over Maggie like a benediction, like permission she hadn't realized she needed. She squeezed Martha's hand, blinking back tears. When did you get so wise? When I made my own mistakes and learned from them. Martha smiled sadly. I had a chance once, to marry, to have children, to build a life with someone I loved. But I was scared of what people would say, scared of leaving my comfortable little world, scared of taking a risk. So I said no. And he moved on, and I spent the next 30 years running a boarding house and wondering what might have been. She stood, moving toward the door. Don't be me, Maggie. Don't let fear steal your future. If your heart is telling you to stay, stay. After Martha left, Maggie sat alone in the growing light, feeling something shift and settle inside her chest. A decision made. A course chosen. She stood, walked to her packed carpet bag, and began to unpack it. The stage could leave without her, but even as she put her dresses back in the wardrobe, even as she felt the rightness of her choice settle into her bones, anxiety twisted in her stomach. She still had to face Ethan and Will, still had to find the words to explain, still had to figure out how to navigate the future she'd just chosen. At 7:30, she descended the stairs dressed not in her traveling suit, but in her everyday dress, a simple blue cotton with small white flowers. Martha looked up from the front desk, saw what she was wearing, and smiled. You're staying. I'm staying. Saying it out loud made it real, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. At least, I'm going to try. I need to talk to Ethan first. Need to... She took a shaky breath. I need to make sure last night wasn't just emotion talking, that he meant what he said. He meant it. Martha came around the desk and pulled her into a tight embrace. That man has been in love with you for months. Anyone with eyes could see it. Maggie returned the embrace, drawing strength from the older woman's certainty. Then she pulled back, straightening her shoulders. I should go. They'll be at the livery soon. You want me to come with you? No, this is something I need to do alone. The walk to the livery felt both endless and far too short. The town was waking up now, people emerging from their homes, opening shops, beginning the daily routines that gave shape to life in Timber Creek. A few greeted her as she passed. Mrs. Crawford with her perpetually disapproving expression, young Tommy Jenkins on his way to help his father at the blacksmith's, the Reverend Thomas heading toward the church. Each greeting felt weighted, significant. These were the people she'd be living among if she stayed, the people whose opinions she'd have to navigate, whose gossip she'd have to endure. The thought made her steps falter, but she forced herself forward. Courage, she told herself. This is what courage looks like. The livery was at the far end of town, a large wooden structure that always smelled of hay and leather and horses. As Maggie approached, she could see the stage already there, the driver checking the rigging while his partner loaded luggage onto the roof. A few other passengers milled about, a traveling salesman she recognized from church, an older woman with her daughter, a young man who looked like he might be heading to the mining camps further north. And there, standing slightly apart from the others, were Ethan and Will. Ethan saw her first. She watched his back straighten, watched him say something to Will that made the boy turn around. Even from a distance, she could see Will's face light up, could see him start to move toward her before his father's hand on his shoulder held him back. They were giving her space, letting her approach on her own terms. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs as she closed the distance between them. Will looked like he hadn't slept either, dark circles under his eyes, his hair uncombed, his shirt buttoned wrong. Ethan looked even worse, his face drawn and pale, his eyes hollow. "Miss Ellis." Ethan's voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the strain beneath it. "We wanted to see you off properly, to say goodbye the right way." "About that," Maggie's voice came out steadier than she felt. She looked at Will, at the desperate hope barely contained in his young face, then back at Ethan. Could we talk? Privately?" Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Hope, fear, something she couldn't quite name. He glanced at Will, who nodded vigorously. "I'll wait right here," the boy said quickly. "I won't move. I promise." Ethan nodded, then gestured toward the side of the livery, away from the other passengers and prying eyes. Maggie followed, her heart in her throat. Once they were alone, sheltered by the building's shadow, Ethan turned to face her. He didn't speak, just waited, his hat in his hands, his whole body tense with barely controlled emotion. "Last night," Maggie began, then stopped, searching for the right words. "Last night you said things that changed everything." "I know." Ethan's voice was rough. "I shouldn't have. I promised myself I wouldn't make this harder for you, but when Will asked me if I cared about you, I couldn't lie anymore. Not to him, not to you, not to myself." "I'm glad you didn't." The words tumbled out in a rush. "Ethan, I've been standing at my window all night, trying to figure out how to do the right thing, how to honor my responsibilities to Clara while also honoring what I feel for you and Will. And I kept coming back to the same question. What if there's a way to do both?" Ethan's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Maggie pulled the sealed letter from her pocket. "I wrote to Clara last night. Told her everything, about you, about Will, about falling in love when I wasn't expecting to. And I told her I'd send money. Enough to hire help on the farm. Enough to make sure she and the children are cared for." "Maggie, let me finish." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I know it's not the same as being there. I know it doesn't fulfill the promise I made. But I also know that if I get on that stage, if I leave today, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. And I can't live with that kind of regret." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Ethan stood frozen, as if afraid to move, afraid to hope. "Are you saying?" His voice cracked. "Are you saying you're staying?" "I'm saying I want to." Maggie stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, to see the slight tremor in his jaw. "But I need to know. Last night, when you said you loved me, when you said you wanted to build a life together, did you mean it? Or was it just the emotion of the moment?" "Did I?" Ethan made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Maggie, I've meant it since the first Sunday you came to supper, and Will laughed at something you said. Really laughed. Not that polite sound he'd been making since Rebecca died, but real laughter that came from somewhere deep inside. And you looked at him with such joy, such genuine happiness, that I thought my heart would stop. That's when I knew. That's when I started falling. He reached out tentatively, and when she didn't pull away, he took her hand in both of his. So yes, I meant every word. I love you, Maggie Ellis. I love your kindness and your strength. I love the way you read to Will, and don't mind when he asks you to repeat the same passage 3 times. I love how you hum when you're washing dishes and don't realize you're doing it. I love... His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I love everything about you. And if you're willing to stay, if you're willing to take a chance on us, then I swear to you, I'll spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. Tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks. I'm scared, Ethan. I'm terrified this won't work, that the town won't accept us, that something will go wrong. I'm scared too. He squeezed her hands gently. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. And as for the town, let them talk. Let them gossip. We'll know the truth, and that's what matters. But what about propriety? What about stage is leaving in 5 minutes? The driver's call interrupted them, sharp and impatient. All aboard, who's coming aboard? Maggie's breath caught, the moment of truth, the point of no return. Ethan seemed to sense her panic. You don't have to decide right now. If you need more time, if you need to go to Clara first and see for yourself that she'll be all right. No. The word came out firm and clear. No, I've already decided. She looked up at him, at this good man who'd somehow become everything to her. Ask me again. Ask you what you asked last night. Through Will. Ask me properly. Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. He released her hands, and for a moment Maggie thought she'd made a terrible mistake. Then he dropped to one knee right there in the dusty yard beside the livery, and her heart stopped. I don't have a ring, he said, looking up at her with such raw vulnerability that it stole her breath. I don't have pretty words prepared. All I have is the truth. Maggie Ellis, I love you. My son loves you. Our home is brighter because you're in it, and our future, any future I can imagine, has you at the center of it. So I'm asking, will you stay? Will you marry me? Will you take a chance on building something new with us? Around them, the world seemed to still. Maggie was dimly aware of the stage driver calling again, of passengers loading, of someone gasping nearby, probably one of the townspeople who'd come to watch the stage depart. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was the man kneeling before her, offering her everything. Yes. The word came out on a breath, then stronger. Yes. Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it. Ethan surged to his feet, and then his arms were around her, and she was laughing and crying at the same time, and somewhere nearby she could hear Will whooping with joy. Ethan pulled back just enough to look at her face, his own expression transformed with happiness. You mean it? You're sure? I've never been more sure of anything. And it was true. Despite the fear, despite the guilt, despite everything, this felt right. I'm staying, Ethan. I'm home. He kissed her then, right there in front of God and the whole town, a kiss that was gentle and desperate and full of promise. Maggie melted into him, feeling years of careful control and rigid propriety fall away. This was what it felt like to choose herself, to choose love. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and laughing, Will crashed into them both, wrapping his arms around them in a fierce embrace. You're staying! You're really staying! He looked up at Maggie with tears streaming down his face. I prayed so hard. I prayed all night that you wouldn't leave, and you're staying. Maggie knelt down, framing his face with her hands. I'm staying, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. Stage is leaving. The driver's final call was impatient now. Last call! Ethan straightened, one arm around Maggie and the other around Will. Together, they watched as the stage pulled away in a cloud of dust, carrying other people toward other futures. The traveling salesman waved from the window. The young woman with her mother looked back with curiosity, and then they were gone, disappearing down the road that led east toward the life Maggie wasn't going to live. No regrets? Ethan asked softly. Maggie leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him against her side, feeling Will's hand clutch hers tightly. No regrets. But even as she said it, reality began to creep in. Mrs. Crawford was standing outside the general store, mouth agape. Reverend Thomas had paused on his way to the church, his expression unreadable. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion, and Maggie could feel their eyes on her, could almost hear the wheels of gossip beginning to turn. "Well," a familiar voice said behind them. Martha had appeared, slightly out of breath. "I see I missed the proposal, but I caught the acceptance. Congratulations, you three." "Thank you, Martha." Maggie turned to smile at her friend, then faltered at the expression on the older woman's face. "What is it?" "Nothing bad, dear. Just, you might want to prepare yourself. Word is going to spread fast, and not everyone will be happy about this development." As if on cue, Mrs. Crawford marched over, her face pinched with disapproval. "Miss Ellis, Mr. Irwin, I trust you both realize what a spectacle you've just made. Kissing in public, making promises, and you're not even properly courted, let alone engaged." "Well, actually," Ethan said, his voice level but firm, "we are engaged, as of about 2 minutes ago." "Well," Mrs. Crawford's face flushed, "the impropriety of it all. What kind of example does this set for the children? What kind of teacher?" "What kind of teacher," Martha interrupted, her voice sharp, "would sacrifice her own happiness out of fear of wagging tongues? What kind of town would we be if we punished people for choosing love over loneliness?" Mrs. Crawford sputtered, but before she could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "I think," Reverend Thomas said, approaching with measured steps, "that we should all take a breath before making judgments." He looked at Maggie, his expression serious but not unkind. "Miss Ellis, might I have a word with you, privately?" Maggie felt Ethan tense beside her, felt Will's hand tighten in hers, but she nodded. "Of course, Reverend." They moved a few steps away, just far enough for privacy, but still within sight of the others. The Reverend studied her face for a long moment before speaking. "I won't pretend I'm not surprised by this morning's events," he said carefully. "When I spoke with you Sunday about propriety, I thought I'd made clear the expectations for a woman in your position." "You did." Maggie lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "But I've realized something, Reverend. I've spent my whole life meeting other people's expectations, and where has it gotten me? Alone, lonely, afraid to reach for happiness because someone might disapprove. Well, I'm done with that. I'm done letting fear dictate my choices. Even if it means facing gossip, disapproval, possibly losing your teaching position?" The words hit like a blow. Maggie hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered that staying might cost her the job she loved. "Would the school board really—" "I don't know," Thomas admitted. "But I think you should prepare yourself for the possibility. Mrs. Crawford sits on that board, as you know, and she's already made her feelings clear." Maggie glanced back at Ethan, at Will standing close to his father's side, both watching her with concern. The thought of losing her position hurt. Teaching was more than a job to her, it was a calling, but the thought of losing them hurt infinitely more. "Then I'll face that when it comes," she said quietly. "But I won't walk away from them. Not now. Not when I've finally found where I belong." Something shifted in the Reverend's expression, respect perhaps, or understanding. "You love them, truly love them." "More than I knew I could love anyone," he nodded slowly. "Then I suppose I should offer my congratulations rather than my censure. Though I must insist, if you're going to marry, it should be soon, for propriety's sake, and for the sake of both your reputations." "How soon?" "A week? 2 at most." He smiled slightly. "I assume you'll want to write to your sister first, to explain." "I already have." Maggie touched the letter in her pocket. "I need to send this today, and I need—" She took a breath. "I need to send money too, for hiring help on her farm. It's the least I can do." "That's generous of you, more than many would do." Thomas glanced over at Ethan. "He's a good man, Miss Ellis. Rebecca's death nearly destroyed him, but he's found his way back. Thanks in large part to you, I think." "And Will?" "That boy has grown more in the past 6 months than in the 2 years before. You've been good for them both." He paused, then added, "But be prepared. This won't be easy. There will be talk, judgment, people who can't see past their own narrow views. Are you strong enough for that?" Maggie thought about everything she'd overcome. Losing her parents, supporting herself, teaching in towns that didn't always welcome single women in positions of authority. She thought about the strength it took to walk away from duty toward love. "I'll have to be," she said simply. They returned to the others, and Ethan immediately searched her face. "Everything all right?" "The Reverend has agreed to marry us," Maggie said. "Soon, within 2 weeks." Will's face split into a grin. 2 weeks? Really? Really. Maggie looked at Thomas. "Unless you have objections." "None that matter," the Reverend said, "though I suggest you speak with the school board as soon as possible. Better they hear it from you than through gossip." After Thomas left, taking a still protesting Mrs. Crawford with him, the four of them stood in the now quiet livery yard: Maggie, Ethan, Will, and Martha. "Well," Martha said, breaking the silence, "that was quite a morning, and it's not even 9 o'clock yet." "I need to send this letter," Maggie said, pulling it from her pocket. "And I need to speak with Mr. Davies at the bank about sending money to Clara. And I should probably talk to the school board before Mrs. Crawford poisons them against me completely." "I'll come with you," Ethan said immediately. "No." Maggie squeezed his hand. "Thank you, but this is something I need to do myself. You and Will should go home, get some rest. You both look exhausted. I'll come out to the ranch this afternoon, and we can talk about everything. The wedding, the future, all of it." "You're sure?" Ethan looked uncertain. "I don't want you facing this alone." "I'm not alone. Not anymore." She smiled at him, then at Will. "I have you. I have Martha. I have people who care about me. That's more than enough." But as she watched them ride away, Ethan on his horse with Will perched behind him, both turning to wave before they disappeared around the bend, Maggie felt the weight of her decision settle fully onto her shoulders. She'd chosen love over duty. She'd chosen to stay. Now she had to deal with the consequences. "Come on," Martha said, linking her arm through Maggie's. "Let's get that letter posted and that money sent. Then we'll face the school board together." "You don't have to—" "Hush, of course I do. That's what friends are for." The post office was their first stop. Mr. Henderson, no relation to Martha, despite sharing a name, accepted the letter with a knowing look. "Heard you're staying," he said, stamping the envelope. "Congratulations. That Irwin boy could use a mother, and Ethan's been alone too long." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson." "Don't thank me. Just be prepared for what's coming. This town can be kind, but it can also be cruel, especially to those who don't follow the rules." It was a warning Maggie had heard twice now, and she was beginning to understand its weight. But she nodded, paid for the postage, and moved on. The bank was next. Mr. Davies, a portly man with spectacles and a perpetually worried expression, listened as Maggie explained her situation. She wanted to set up a regular payment to her sister, monthly installments that Clara could use to hire help on the farm. "That's quite generous," Davies said, calculating figures on a piece of paper. "Though I must say, Miss Ellis, are you certain you can afford it? A teacher's salary isn't exactly—" "I'll make it work," Maggie said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Davies studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. I'll set up the transfer. First payment will go out at the end of the week." By the time they left the bank, it was nearly 11. The school board met at noon in the back room of the general store. Maggie had two choices. She could go now and wait, or she could go home and gather her courage. She chose to wait. Mrs. Crawford was the first to arrive, her expression sour. Then came Mr. Davies from the bank, followed by Doc Morrison, whose wife had been Rebecca's closest friend. Finally, Mayor Clemens, a jovial man who generally avoided conflict, took his seat at the head of the table. "Miss Ellis," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from them, "we hear congratulations are in order." "Thank you, Mayor." Maggie sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "I assume you also know why I'm here." "To resign your position," Mrs. Crawford said with barely concealed satisfaction, "given your impending marriage and the impropriety of this morning's display." "Actually," Maggie said evenly, "I'm here to confirm that I intend to continue teaching. Marriage doesn't disqualify me from the position, and I believe I know I'm good at what I do." Mrs. Crawford's face reddened. "The school has never employed a married teacher. The very idea, the school has never had the opportunity, Doc Morrison interrupted, because most women quit to start families. But if Mrs. Irwin, I suppose wants to continue and her husband supports it, then why shouldn't she? Because it's improper, Mrs. Crawford sputtered. Because people will talk. Because people are already talking, Mayor Clemens said mildly. They've been talking since Miss Ellis started visiting the Irwin Ranch. So the question isn't whether there will be gossip, but whether Miss Ellis is the best person for the job, regardless of that gossip. He looked at Maggie. Are you? Yes. She met his gaze squarely. I love teaching. I love these children, and I'm good at my job. My marital status doesn't change that. But what about when you have children of your own? Davies asked. Surely you'll want to stay home then. Perhaps. Perhaps not. That's a decision my husband and I will make when the time comes. Maggie paused, then added, but Will needs me now. He needs consistency, stability, someone who won't abandon him. And the other children in this town need a teacher who cares about them, who'll fight for their education, who'll see their potential even when no one else does. I can be that person, whether I'm Miss Ellis or Mrs. Irwin. Silence fell over the room. Mrs. Crawford looked ready to explode. Doc Morrison was nodding thoughtfully. Davies seemed uncertain, and Mayor Clemens, I propose we put it to a vote, he said. All in favor of allowing Miss Ellis to continue teaching after her marriage? Morrison's hand went up immediately. After a long pause, Davies raised his as well. Opposed? Mrs. Crawford's hand shot up. Then it's decided, Clemens said, ignoring Mrs. Crawford's outraged gasp. Miss Ellis keeps her position, though I must echo Reverend Thomas's advice, marry soon. The sooner you're properly wed, the sooner this gossip will die down. Maggie stood on shaky legs. Thank you. All of you. I won't let you down. As she and Martha left the store, Maggie felt tears threatening. She'd kept her job. She could marry Ethan and still teach. She could have both the family she'd found and the work she loved. See? Martha squeezed her arm. I told you it would work out. One hurdle down, Maggie said. About 100 more to go. But as they walked back toward the boarding house in the noon sunshine, Maggie felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. She'd chosen to stay. She'd chosen love. And somehow, miraculously, it was all going to work out. By the time Maggie borrowed Martha's horse and rode out to the Irwin Ranch that afternoon, the initial euphoria of the morning had given way to something more complex, a mixture of joy and trepidation, excitement and fear. The reality of what she'd done was beginning to sink in. She'd turned her entire life upside down in the space of a few hours. She'd chosen a future she couldn't fully predict with a man she'd known for only 6 months, and a boy who'd somehow stolen her heart completely. The ranch house came into view as she crested the hill, and Maggie felt something loosen in her chest. The 2-story structure had been dark and lifeless when she'd first seen it back in March. Now, with summer flowers blooming in the beds she'd helped plant and curtains she'd helped mend fluttering in the windows, it looked like what it was, a home. Her home, if she was brave enough to claim it. Ethan must have been watching for her because he emerged from the barn before she'd even dismounted. His hair was damp, his shirt clean. He'd bathed and changed since this morning, she realized. The thought made her heart flutter inexplicably. You came, he said, reaching up to help her down from the horse. His hands lingered at her waist, perhaps a moment longer than necessary. I said I would. Maggie's feet touched the ground, but she didn't step away. This close, she could smell the soap he'd used, could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, marks of laughter and sorrow both. Did you think I'd changed my mind? I thought... He stopped, his jaw working. I thought maybe once you were alone, once you had time to really think about what this means, you might realize you'd made a mistake. Ethan, Maggie reached up and cupped his face with one hand, feeling the slight scratch of stubble against her palm. The only mistake I almost made was getting on that stage this morning. Everything else, this, us, choosing to stay, that's the first truly right thing I've done in years. He turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss there that made her breath catch. I don't deserve you. That's not your decision to make. She smiled, trying to lighten the moment. Where's Will? Inside, practically climbing the walls with excitement. He's been asking every 5 minutes when you'd get here. Ethan took her hand, lacing their fingers together in a gesture that felt both natural and momentous. Fair warning, he's made plans, lots of plans, about the wedding, about where you'll sleep, about what we'll have for supper tonight to celebrate. I couldn't get him to calm down. Why would you want him to calm down? This is a happy day. Maggie let him lead her toward the house, savoring the feel of her hand in his. We should all be excited. I am excited. Ethan stopped at the porch steps, turning to face her. I'm also terrified. Maggie, Rebecca and I, we courted for 2 years before we married. We knew each other our whole lives. But you and I, we've only known each other 6 months, and most of that was just, he gestured vaguely. Suppers and conversations and me trying not to let you see how much I was falling for you. And you think that's not enough? Those suppers, those conversations, Ethan, I've learned more about you in 6 months than I learned about most people in years. I know you wake up before dawn and check on the horses first thing. I know you take your coffee black and hate beans, but eat them anyway because they're practical. I know you bite your thumbnail when you're worried and that you read Rebecca's Bible every night before bed. I know, her voice softened. I know you're a good father, a good man, and someone I want to spend my life with. Isn't that enough? Before he could answer, the front door burst open and Will came flying out, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste. Miss Ellis, you're here! I was starting to think maybe you got lost or changed your mind or... He crashed into her with enough force to nearly knock them both over, wrapping his arms around her waist. You really stayed. You really, really stayed. I really did. Maggie ran her fingers through his dark hair, noting that it needed cutting. She'd have to do that soon, another small domestic task that made her part of their family. Did you think I'd break my promise? No. Maybe. I don't know. Will pulled back, looking up at her with eyes that held too much worry for a 12-year-old. People break promises sometimes, even when they don't mean to. The echo of his mother's death hung unspoken between them. Maggie knelt down so they were eye level. Your mother didn't break her promise, sweetheart. She didn't choose to leave you, but I am choosing to stay. Do you understand the difference? I think so. Will bit his lip, then blurted out, Are you really going to marry Pa? Really, truly? Really, truly? Maggie glanced up at Ethan, who was watching them with an expression that made her chest tight. In 2 weeks, if that's all right with you. 2 weeks? Will's eyes went wide. That's so soon. We have to get ready. We have to... He grabbed her hand, tugging her toward the door. Come inside. I made a list of everything we need to do. The interior of the ranch house was exactly as Maggie remembered. Simple but comfortable, with Rebecca's touches still visible in the careful placement of furniture, the embroidered samplers on the walls. But there were new touches too, things that had appeared over the past months. The vase of wildflowers on the kitchen table that she refreshed every week. The bookshelf Ethan had built to hold her growing collection of primers and readers. The braided rug by the fireplace that she and Will had made together on rainy afternoons. Will led her to the kitchen table, where he'd laid out several pieces of paper covered in his careful handwriting. See, I made lists. Things we need for the wedding, things we need to fix in the house before you move in, things we should have for supper to celebrate. Will! Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. Maybe give Miss Ellis a chance to sit down before you overwhelm her with plans. Right. Sorry. Will pulled out a chair for her with exaggerated courtesy that made Maggie hide a smile. Would you like some water? Or coffee? We have coffee. Pa made a fresh pot after we got home because he said he needed something to do with his hands or he'd go crazy waiting for you. Water would be lovely, thank you. Maggie sat, accepting the glass Will brought her, and looked at the list spread across the table. Her heart squeezed at the sight of them, the careful detail, the obvious thought and hope that had gone into every line. You've been busy. I wanted everything to be perfect. Will slid into the chair beside her while Ethan leaned against the counter, coffee cup in hand, watching them both. Because this is important. This is everything. The simple statement hung in the air, heavy with meaning, Maggie reached over and squeezed his hand. Then let's look at these lists together and figure out what's possible. For the next hour, they did exactly that. Will's plans were ambitious. He wanted flowers everywhere, wanted to repaint the entire house, wanted to invite the whole town to witness the wedding. Maggie gently scaled back some of the grander ideas while validating his enthusiasm, and Ethan interjected practical considerations about time and money and what could reasonably be accomplished in 2 weeks. "What about your dress?" Will asked suddenly. "Ma's wedding dress is still in the trunk upstairs. It's really pretty, white with lace and buttons down the back. Maybe you could wear it." The suggestion was so innocent, so well-meaning, that it took Maggie a moment to find her voice. She looked at Ethan, whose face had gone carefully blank. "That's a kind thought, Will," she said carefully. "But I think your mother's dress should stay with your family. Maybe saved for when you get married someday, or for a sister if—" She stopped, realizing she was getting ahead of herself. "I can wear my Sunday dress. It's perfectly fine." "But it's not special enough," Will protested. "This is your wedding day. You should have something beautiful." "I'll be marrying your father," Maggie said softly. "That makes it beautiful enough." Ethan set down his coffee cup with a click that seemed too loud in the suddenly quiet kitchen. "Will, why don't you go check on the chickens? Make sure they have enough water." "But, please, son." Something in Ethan's tone made Will nod and scurry out the back door without further protest. Once he was gone, Ethan turned to Maggie, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry about that. About the dress. He didn't mean—" "I know he didn't." Maggie stood, crossing to where Ethan stood by the counter. "He's trying to make me feel welcome, trying to make this real. I'm not offended." "But it was thoughtless. Rebecca is—" Ethan's voice roughened. "She's always going to be part of this house, part of our lives. And I don't want you to feel like you're competing with a ghost." "I'm not competing." Maggie chose her words carefully. "Rebecca was Will's mother. She was your wife. She loved you both. And you loved her. I would never ask you to forget that or pretend it didn't matter." But I'm not her. I can't be her, and I don't want to try." Maggie took a breath, voicing something she'd been thinking about since this morning. "Ethan, if we're going to do this, if we're going to build a life together, we need to be honest about what that means. I'm not here to replace Rebecca. I'm here to build something new with you and Will, something that honors what came before but isn't bound by it." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been thinking about a lot of things." Maggie reached for his hand, needing the connection. "I kept myself awake all night asking questions, wondering if I was being selfish, wondering if you really meant what you said or if it was just the emotion of the moment, wondering if Will really wants a new mother or if he's just scared of being alone, wondering if I can actually do this, step into a ready-made family, navigate a town that already thinks I'm improper, teach school, and be a wife and a mother all at once." "And what answers did you come up with?" "That I don't know. I don't know if I can do all of it perfectly. I'll probably make mistakes. I'll probably disappoint people. Maybe even you and Will sometimes. But I know—" She squeezed his hand. "I know I want to try. I know that when I imagined getting on that stage this morning, when I imagined leaving you both behind, it felt like dying. And when I imagined staying, even with all the uncertainty and fear, it felt like coming home." Ethan pulled her close then, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like sanctuary. Maggie leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, feeling the strength in the arms that held her. "I'm scared too," he admitted quietly. "Scared I'll let you down. Scared I won't be enough after everything you've given up. Scared something will happen and I'll lose you like I lost Rebecca." "You can't think like that." "I know, but I can't help it." His arms tightened around her. "When Rebecca got sick, when I watched her fade away over those weeks and couldn't do anything to stop it, I swore I'd never let myself care that much again. Never let myself be that vulnerable. And then you came along and—" His voice broke. "And now I'm terrified something will take you away too." Maggie pulled back just enough to look up at him. "Nothing's going to take me away. I'm healthy, I'm careful, and I'm choosing to be here. You're not going to lose me, Ethan. You can't promise that. No, she admitted. I can't. None of us can promise tomorrow, but I can promise today. I can promise that right now, in this moment, I choose you. I choose us. Isn't that enough? Before Ethan could answer, the back door burst open and Will tumbled in, breathless with excitement. Pa! Miss Ellis, come quick! There's a wagon coming up the road. Ethan tensed. Are you expecting anyone? No. Maggie felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Maybe it's just someone passing through. But as they moved to the front porch, it became clear the wagon was definitely heading toward the ranch. And as it drew closer, Maggie recognized the driver, Doc Morrison, with his wife Anna beside him. Company, Ethan muttered, but he didn't sound displeased. Anna Morrison had been Rebecca's closest friend, and her opinion would carry weight in the community. If she approved of Maggie, others might follow. If she didn't, the wagon pulled to a stop, and Doc Morrison helped his wife down before climbing down himself. Anna was a small woman with graying hair and kind eyes, dressed in her Sunday best despite it being a Thursday afternoon. Ethan, Will, she called out in greeting. Then her gaze landed on Maggie, still standing close to Ethan on the porch. And Miss Ellis, or should I say Mrs. Irwin-to-be. Word travels fast in this town. Mrs. Morrison. Maggie descended the porch steps, uncertain of her welcome. It's good to see you. Anna studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to Maggie's surprise, she smiled. Oh, come here, girl. She pulled Maggie into a tight embrace. Welcome to the family. Maggie felt tears prick at her eyes. You don't think it's too soon, too improper. Too soon? Anna pulled back, still holding Maggie's arms. Honey, I've been watching you and Ethan circle each other like nervous deer for months. The only thing that's too soon is that it took you this long to admit how you felt. She glanced past Maggie to where Ethan stood on the porch, a slight smile on his face. And as for improper, well, Rebecca would have boxed your ears for waiting so long to be happy again, Ethan Irwin. Ethan's smile widened. You think so? I know so. That woman loved you too much to want you spending the rest of your life alone. Anna turned back to Maggie. Which brings me to why we're here. Doc and I heard about the wedding, heard it's happening in 2 weeks, and we wanted to offer our help. Your help? Maggie repeated. With the preparations, of course. Anna moved toward the wagon, where several bundles were tied in the back. I brought Rebecca's good linens, the ones she was saving for special occasions. And I have some flowers I can transplant from my garden. And she pulled out a carefully wrapped bundle. I brought this. She unfolded the bundle to reveal a dress, simple but beautiful, made of cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar, and cuffs. It was mine, from when I married Doc. I know it's not fancy, but I thought you might want something special to wear. Something that's yours, not borrowed or made due. Maggie's throat closed up completely. The kindness, the generosity, the acceptance implicit in the gesture. It was almost too much. Mrs. Morrison, I can't. You can and you will. Anna pressed the dress into Maggie's hands. Every bride deserves to feel beautiful on her wedding day, even brides who are too practical for their own good. Doc Morrison chuckled. She's been planning this since she heard the news this morning. Wouldn't let me have a moment's peace until we packed up and came out here. Because someone needs to help these people organize a wedding in 2 weeks, Anna said briskly. Now, Ethan, you and Doc go do whatever men do when they're nervous and useless. Will, you come help me take stock of this kitchen. And Maggie, she softened, you come with me upstairs. Let's see if this dress fits and talk about what else you'll need. The next 2 hours passed in a flurry of activity. Anna took command of the house with the confidence of someone who'd been there many times before, pointing out what needed cleaning, what needed fixing, what could be improved before the wedding. She enlisted Will as her assistant, and the boy threw himself into the tasks with enthusiasm, clearly thrilled to have an adult who took his preparation seriously. In the small bedroom that had been Ethan and Rebecca's, that would soon be Ethan and Maggie's, Anna helped Maggie try on the wedding dress. It fit nearly perfectly, needing only minor adjustments at the waist. There, Anna said, stepping back to assess. You look lovely. Ethan won't be able to take his eyes off you. Maggie looked at herself in the small mirror, seeing a woman she barely recognized. Not the stern schoolteacher or the dutiful sister, but someone softer, someone hopeful, someone in love. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered. "2 days ago, I was packing to leave, and now you're where you're supposed to be." Anna began helping her out of the dress with practiced efficiency. "I won't pretend I wasn't surprised when I heard. You and Ethan have been so careful, so proper, but I saw the way you looked at each other at church, the way you both tried so hard not to look at each other. It was only a matter of time. Were we that obvious?" To someone who was watching, yes. Anna folded the dress carefully. "I'll take this home and make the adjustments. You can pick it up next week." She paused, then added more quietly, "I need to tell you something, Maggie. About Rebecca." Maggie's stomach tensed. "All right." "She was my dearest friend. We grew up together, married men who were friends, raised our children alongside each other. When she got sick," Anna's voice wavered. "When she got sick, I was with her almost every day until the end. And I can tell you what she said in those final weeks when she knew she wouldn't recover." Maggie wasn't sure she wanted to hear this, but she nodded for Anna to continue. She was worried. Not about dying. She'd made her peace with that. But she was worried about Ethan and Will. Worried they'd close themselves off from the world, that they'd forget how to be happy. "She made me promise to watch over them, to make sure they didn't just survive, but lived." Anna met Maggie's eyes directly. "She would be glad you're here. She would be glad Ethan found someone to love again, someone who loves Will, someone who brings light back into this house. So don't ever feel guilty about taking her place, because you're not taking her place. You're giving them a future. There's a difference." The words hit Maggie like a benediction, like permission she hadn't known she needed. She felt tears spill over, and Anna immediately pulled her into another embrace. "There now, no crying on your almost wedding day, or at least only happy crying." Anna pulled back, smiling through her own tears. "Now, let's talk practical matters. Have you thought about food for after the ceremony? Flowers? Music?" They descended the stairs to find the kitchen transformed. Will had swept and mopped, and Doc Morrison had apparently tackled some minor repairs. A loose cabinet door rehung, a wobbly table leg fixed. Ethan stood at the stove making coffee and looked up when they entered. His eyes met Maggie's, and something passed between them. Gratitude, affection, the beginning of something that felt like forever. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Everything's perfect," Maggie said, and meant it. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Anna proved to be a force of nature, organizing details Maggie hadn't even thought to consider. Food for the reception, simple but plentiful, provided by neighbors who would consider it an honor to contribute. Flowers from Anna's garden and others willing to share. Music from the fiddle player who performed at most town gatherings. The ceremony itself would be at the church, followed by a reception at the ranch. "It'll be beautiful," Anna promised as she and Doc prepared to leave as the sun began its descent. "Simple but beautiful. Exactly right for you two." After they left, the three of them stood on the porch, watching the wagon disappear down the road. Will leaned against Maggie's side, and she wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Ethan stood on her other side, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "Thank you," Ethan said quietly, "for staying, for agreeing to all of this, for—" He gestured at the house, at Will, at the future stretching out before them. "For everything." "Thank you for asking me," Maggie replied, "for being brave enough to say what you felt, for giving me a reason to stay." Will looked up at her, his young face serious. "Are you scared? About getting married and everything changing?" "Yes," Maggie admitted, "but I'm more excited than scared." "Does that make sense?" "I think so." Will considered this. "I'm scared too sometimes. Scared I'll wake up and you'll be gone. But Pa says we have to have faith, that we can't live our whole lives being afraid of bad things that might happen. Your Pa is a wise man." Maggie looked at Ethan, who ducked his head slightly, embarrassed. "And he's right. We can't control the future. All we can do is choose to be brave today and trust that tomorrow will take care of itself." As twilight settled over the valley, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Maggie felt something settle in her chest. a sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, moments of doubt and fear. But standing here between the man she loved and the boy who'd claimed a piece of her heart, Maggie knew she'd made the right choice. She'd chosen to stay. She'd chosen love. She'd chosen home. And everything else would follow from that. The 2 weeks that followed moved with a strange duality, simultaneously rushing past in a blur of preparation and crawling by with agonizing slowness. Maggie continued teaching during the day, facing down curious stares and whispered comments from parents who brought their children to school. Some were kind, offering congratulations and well wishes. Others were cold, their disapproval evident in tight smiles and clipped conversations. Mrs. Crawford, true to form, made her feelings known by pointedly looking away whenever Maggie passed her on the street. But for every critical glance, there were 2 kind ones. For every whispered judgment, there were 3 offers of help. Anna Morrison proved to be a faithful ally, rallying other women in the community to contribute to the wedding preparations. Even Martha, who claimed to have no domestic skills whatsoever, threw herself into the effort with enthusiasm. 5 days after Maggie's decision to stay, a letter arrived from Clara. Maggie was at the school when the post came, reviewing lessons for the following day while her students worked on arithmetic problems. Mr. Henderson's son, Tommy, appeared at the door, slightly out of breath from running, holding an envelope. Miss Ellis, who's going to be Mrs. Irwin, this just came for you. Pa said it looked important. Maggie's heart jumped into her throat when she saw Clara's handwriting on the envelope. She thanked Tommy and set the letter aside, forcing herself to wait until the school day ended before opening it. The students seemed to sense her distraction, though, shooting curious glances her way throughout the afternoon. When the final bell rang and the last child scattered out the door toward home, Maggie sat at her desk, staring at the envelope as if it might bite her. Whatever Clara had written in response to her confession would determine so much. If her sister was angry, if she felt betrayed or abandoned, you going to open it or just stare at it until it opens itself? Maggie looked up to find Martha standing in the doorway, a knowing expression on her face. How did you know? Tommy Henderson has the biggest mouth in town. By now, everyone knows a letter came from your sister. Martha came in and closed the door behind her. Want me to stay while you read it? Please. With trembling fingers, Maggie broke the seal and unfolded the pages. Clara's handwriting was as familiar as her own, slightly slanted and pressed hard into the paper. She began to read. Dearest Margaret, your letter arrived yesterday, and I confess I've read it no less than a dozen times, trying to understand all that you've written. You say you've fallen in love. You say you've found where you belong. You say you cannot, will not, come home as promised. Maggie's chest tightened. Here it came. The anger, the disappointment. And I say, thank God. Maggie blinked, certain she'd misread. But no, there it was in black ink. Thank God. Margaret, I have spent the past 3 weeks since Thomas died consumed with guilt. Guilt that I wrote to you. Guilt that I begged you to come help me when I knew, dear sister, that you were finally building a life for yourself. You wrote to me about Timber Creek with such joy in your letters, about your students, about the beautiful valley, about the rancher and his son who had supper with you on Sundays. Even in your careful, proper words, I could read between the lines. You were happy, perhaps for the first time since Mother and Father died. And then Thomas passed, and I was so overwhelmed, so desperate, that I asked you to give up that happiness and come save me. What kind of sister does that make me? Maggie's vision blurred with tears. She read on. When your letter arrived explaining everything, the proposal, your decision to stay, the money you're sending for hired help, my first reaction was relief. Pure, selfish relief that you had found the courage to choose yourself for once. And then came the joy, Margaret. Joy that you've found love. Joy that you're building a family. Joy that you're finally putting yourself first. I won't pretend it won't be hard here without you. The farm is struggling and the children ask for you constantly. But Anna Henderson, you remember her from when we were girls, has already found a young woman from the next county who's willing to come help in exchange for room and board. And the money you're sending will make all the difference. We'll manage, sister. We'll survive. And more than that, we'll be happy for you. So please, stop feeling guilty. Stop second-guessing your choice. Marry your rancher. Love his son. Build your life in that beautiful valley. You've spent enough years taking care of everyone else. It's time someone took care of you. Write to me often. Tell me everything. And if you're ever in need, if you ever want to come visit or need me to come to you, you have only to ask. Distance doesn't change the fact that you're my sister and I love you. All my love and blessings, Clara P.S. The children insist I tell Aunt Maggie that they're happy she's getting married and they want to know if her new son will be their cousin. I leave that particular bit of family tree explanation to you. Maggie finished reading and looked up to find Martha watching her with concern. Well? The older woman prompted. What did she say? Maggie's voice broke. She tried again. She said she's happy for me, that I should stop feeling guilty, The tears came in earnest now, great heaving sobs of relief and gratitude and released tension. She gave me her blessing, Martha. She's not angry. She's not hurt. She wants me to be happy. Martha crossed the room and pulled Maggie into a tight embrace. Of course she does, you silly girl. That's what people who love you do. They want you to be happy, even when it's hard for them. Maggie cried into Martha's shoulder, releasing weeks of pent-up anxiety and guilt. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with her handkerchief, she felt lighter than she had in years. The last weight holding her back had been lifted. I need to show this to Ethan, she said. He needs to know that Clara understands, that I'm not abandoning her. Then let's get you out to that ranch. Martha stood, already moving toward the door with purposeful strides. I'll drive you myself. No sense wasting time when you've got good news to share. They arrived at the ranch an hour later to find Ethan and Will working together to repair a section of fence near the barn. Both were shirtless in the afternoon heat, their skin bronzed by the sun. Maggie felt her cheeks warm at the sight of Ethan, at the flex of muscle in his shoulders as he hammered a post into place. Soon, she reminded herself, she'd have every right to look. Soon, he'd be her husband. The thought still felt surreal. Will spotted them first. Miss Ellis! Mrs. Henderson! He dropped his hammer and came running, nearly tripping over a loose board in his enthusiasm. Did you come for supper? Pa's making his special stew and I helped chop the vegetables. Actually, Maggie said, climbing down from the wagon with Martha's help, I came because I got a letter. From my sister. She saw Ethan go still, his expression carefully neutral as he approached. But she could read the tension in his shoulders, the worry in his eyes. He was afraid. Afraid Clara had asked Maggie to come after all. Afraid she'd changed her mind about staying. What did she say? His voice was steady, but Maggie heard the tremor underneath. Instead of answering, she pulled the letter from her pocket and handed it to him. Read it yourself. Ethan took the letter with dirt-stained hands, his eyes scanning the pages. Maggie watched his face transform as he read, the tension easing, the worry melting away, something that looked like wonder taking its place. When he finished, he looked up at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. She's happy for you, for us. She is. Maggie moved closer, aware of Will and Martha watching but not caring. No more guilt, Ethan. No more wondering if I made the right choice. Clara's blessed this union, and that means, her voice caught, that means I can marry you with my whole heart, without anything holding me back. Ethan dropped the letter and pulled her into his arms, heedless of his sweaty, dirt-covered state. Maggie went willingly, pressing her face against his bare shoulder, feeling his heart race beneath her cheek. 8 more days, he murmured into her hair. 8 more days and you'll be my wife. 8 more days, she echoed, and it felt like both forever and no time at all. Will cleared his throat loudly. Does this mean we can celebrate? Because I've been waiting for good news so I could ask Pa if we could have cake for supper instead of stew. The tension broke with laughter. Ethan released Maggie reluctantly, ruffling his son's hair. Cake is not supper, Will. But Miss Ellis is staying forever now. That's worth celebrating. The boy has a point, Martha interjected, and I just happen to have brought one of my famous apple pies. Been cooling in the wagon this whole time. So they had pie for supper, eaten on the porch as the sun set, the 4 of them squeezed together on the steps like they'd been doing it for years instead of months. Will chattered about the wedding preparations, about how he'd cleaned his room twice to make sure it met Maggie's standards, about how he'd been practicing his reading so he could read scripture at the ceremony if they wanted. The Reverend said I could do it, he explained around a mouthful of pie. He said it would be fitting since you're my teacher and you're marrying my pa, and I'm the reason you met in the first place. You are definitely the reason we met, Maggie agreed, smiling at the memory of that first parent-teacher conference back in March. Ethan had come reluctantly, dragged there by Will's insistence that Miss Ellis needed to meet his father. She'd been struck by how lost he'd looked, this big man sitting in a child-sized chair, clearly uncomfortable, but trying his best for his son's sake. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Ethan asked, as if reading her thoughts. "When I apologized for Will struggling with his reading? I told you he wasn't struggling, he was grieving, there's a difference. And then you said..." Ethan's voice softened. "You said grief doesn't have a timeline, and the best thing I could do was let him feel what he needed to feel while making sure he knew he wasn't alone. It was the first time since Rebecca died that anyone had given me permission to not be okay, to not have all the answers." "You cried," Will added matter-of-factly, "in the wagon on the way home. You didn't think I noticed, but I did." Ethan's cheeks reddened slightly. "Will, it's okay, Pa. Miss Ellis cried too. I saw her watching us leave, and she had tears on her face." Will looked at Maggie. "That's when I knew you were special. Because you cared about us, even though you barely knew us." Maggie felt her own tears threatening again. "You made it very easy to care about you both." As twilight deepened into night, Martha eventually declared she needed to get back to town before it got too dark to see the road. Maggie moved to leave with her, but Ethan caught her hand. "Stay," he said quietly. "Just a little longer, please." Martha waved them off. "I can see myself out. You three enjoy your evening." After she left, Will excused himself to get ready for bed, leaving Ethan and Maggie alone on the porch. The stars were beginning to emerge, sharp and bright against the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "This is going to be my life," Maggie said softly. "These stars, these sounds, this porch." "Having second thoughts?" Ethan asked, but there was no real worry in his voice. Not anymore. Not even close. She leaned into him, letting herself savor the closeness, the rightness of it. "I keep waiting for it to feel strange or wrong or scary, but it doesn't. It just feels like coming home. That's what it is." Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Home. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, until Will called out that he was ready for bed. Maggie went inside to tuck him in, a ritual that had become theirs over the past months. She sat on the edge of his bed while he snuggled under the quilt, his eyes already heavy with sleep. "8 more days," he murmured, "and then you'll be here all the time." "All the time," Maggie confirmed, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Can I tell you something?" Will's voice was small, vulnerable in the darkness. "Something I haven't told Pa?" "Of course. Sometimes I forget what Ma looked like. Not completely, but her face gets fuzzy in my head, and it scares me. Because what if I forget her completely? What if having you here makes me forget her?" Maggie's heart broke for him. She thought carefully about her words before speaking. "Will, loving me doesn't mean forgetting your mother. Your heart is big enough for both of us. And if you ever feel like you're forgetting her, you can look at her picture, or ask your father to tell you stories about her, or talk to Mrs. Morrison, who knew her so well. She'll always be your mother. Nothing changes that. But you'll be my mother too, kind of, if you want me to be. But only if you want it, Will. I won't try to take her place. I'll just love you and be here for you in whatever way feels right to you." Will considered this, then nodded against his pillow. "I think Ma would like you. I think she'd be happy I have someone to take care of me, someone who doesn't burn breakfast and remembers to check if I have holes in my socks." Maggie laughed softly. "Does your father burn breakfast?" "Every single time, and he never notices my socks have holes until I complain my toes are cold." "Well then, it's a good thing I'm moving in. Someone needs to save you both from yourselves." She kissed his forehead and stood to leave, but Will caught her hand. "Miss Ellis?" "Thank you." for staying, for choosing us. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay. Ethan was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when she descended. Everything all right? Perfect. She told him about their conversation, about Will's fears and questions. He's worried about forgetting Rebecca, about whether loving me means being disloyal to her memory. I've worried about the same thing, Ethan admitted. Wondered if moving forward means leaving her behind. Does it? No. He said it with certainty. Rebecca will always be part of our story. She gave me Will. She taught me how to love, how to be a husband, how to build a life with someone. And now, he took Maggie's hands in his. Now I get to use everything she taught me to build a new life with you. That's not betrayal. That's honoring what we had by not letting it be the end. When did you get so wise? When you agreed to marry me and I realized I had to be worthy of that choice. Maggie smiled, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. It was still new, this freedom to touch him, to be close to him without propriety, demanding distance. 8 more days, and there would be no more restraint. 8 more days, and she could call him her husband. The thought made her shiver with anticipation and a touch of nervousness. I should get back to town, she said reluctantly, before it gets any later. I'll ride with you. Make sure you get back safely. They rode together through the summer night, their horses moving at an easy pace. The valley was peaceful around them, bathed in starlight and the soft sounds of evening. When they reached the edge of town, Ethan pulled his horse to a stop. 5 more days of this, he said. 5 more days of saying goodnight and riding away. And then you'll be at the ranch, and I'll never have to watch you leave again. 5 more days, Maggie agreed. I think I can survive 5 more days. But in truth, each day that passed felt longer than the last. The anticipation built steadily, a mixture of excitement and nerves that made it hard to sleep, hard to focus, hard to do anything but count the hours until she could start her new life. 3 days before the wedding, Anna Morrison arrived at the schoolhouse with the altered dress. Maggie tried it on in the small room at the back where supplies were kept, and Anna clapped her hands in delight when she saw the result. Perfect, absolutely perfect. Ethan won't be able to speak when he sees you. I'm more worried about being able to speak myself, Maggie admitted. What if I get up there and forget my vows? What if I trip walking down the aisle? What if you stop borrowing trouble and just enjoy your wedding day? Anna interrupted firmly. You love Ethan. He loves you. The rest is just details. 2 days before the wedding, Maggie taught her last class as Miss Ellis. The students had made her cards and drawings, their childish wishes for happiness bringing tears to her eyes. Even the older boys, usually too cool for sentiment, mumbled congratulations as they left. After school, Will appeared with a wrapped package. It's from me and Pa, he explained, bouncing on his toes with excitement. But mostly from me because I had the idea and made most of it. Pa just helped with the hard parts. Maggie unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful wooden box carved with intricate designs of flowers and birds. Inside, nestled in soft cloth, was a set of hair combs, simple but elegant, made from polished wood and inlaid with small pieces of mother of pearl. For your wedding day, Will said proudly. Pa said Ma's combs should stay with her things, so we made you your own. So you'd have something special that's just yours. Do you like them? Like them? Maggie's voice broke. Will, they're beautiful. They're perfect. I'll treasure them forever. She pulled him into a tight hug, this boy who'd worked his way so completely into her heart. When she released him, she saw Ethan standing in the doorway, watching them with an expression of such love and contentment that it took her breath away. The day before the wedding, Maggie packed up her room at the boarding house. It didn't take long. She'd never accumulated much in her years of moving from town to town, teaching wherever she was needed. A few dresses, some books, personal items that fit easily into 2 small trunks. Martha helped her, keeping up a steady stream of commentary about the wedding preparations, about the food Anna and the other women were preparing, about how half the town was planning to attend despite Mrs. Crawford's vocal disapproval. You've stirred things up, girl, Martha said with satisfaction. Got people thinking about what really matters. Love versus propriety. Happiness versus other people's expectations. You're going to be good for this town, I think. Shake them out of their rigid ways. I just want to marry Ethan and teach school and raise Will, Maggie protested. I'm not trying to revolutionize anything. Sometimes revolution happens whether you're trying or not. You're showing people that it's possible to choose differently, to build a life that doesn't fit the expected mold. That's powerful, Maggie. Don't underestimate it. That evening, Maggie had dinner with Martha one last time in the boarding house kitchen. Tomorrow, she'd wake up in this room for the last time. Tomorrow, she'd put on her wedding dress and walk to the church. Tomorrow, she'd become Mrs. Ethan Irwin and begin the life she'd chosen. Nervous? Martha asked, watching her push food around her plate. Terrified, Maggie admitted. What if I'm a terrible wife? What if I don't know how to run a household properly? What if you're exactly what Ethan and Will need? Martha interrupted. What if you're perfect just as you are? Stop looking for reasons to doubt yourself, Maggie. You've already proven you have the courage to follow your heart. Trust that courage to carry you through whatever comes next. That night, lying in her narrow bed for the last time, Maggie thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. Her parents' deaths, Clara's marriage, years of teaching in different towns, always moving, never settling, the letter from Clara that had brought her to Montana, the first time she'd met Ethan and Will, the slow building of friendship into something deeper, the choice to stay. Every step had led her here. Every choice, every loss, every moment of joy and sorrow had been preparing her for this, for the life waiting just on the other side of tomorrow. She thought about Will's question from weeks ago. Did she have to go, or did she want to go? She'd answered that she wanted to stay, but lying here in the darkness, she realized the truth was even simpler than that. She didn't just want to stay. She needed to stay. The same way flowers need sunshine and rivers need rain. This wasn't just a choice or a want. It was essential, necessary, right in a way that transcended logic or reason. Ethan and Will had become her home, and tomorrow she'd make that official. Tomorrow, she'd become the person she was always meant to be. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through Maggie's window, birdsong replacing the need for any alarm, and Martha bursting through the door with coffee and enthusiasm in equal measure. Up, 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 the older woman commanded, setting the tray on the bedside table. You're getting married today, girl, and we have exactly 4 hours to make you presentable. Maggie sat up, her heart already racing. 4 hours seems like a lot of time to get dressed. Shows what you know about weddings. Martha threw open the wardrobe and began pulling out undergarments with the efficiency of a general preparing for battle. There's bathing and hair and getting into that dress without wrinkling it and making sure you eat something so you don't faint at the altar. 4 hours might not even be enough. Despite her nerves, Maggie laughed. I'm not going to faint. That's what every bride says right before her knees give out during the vows. Martha handed her the coffee. Drink, then into the bath. Anna will be here within the hour to do your hair, and she'll have my hide if you're not clean and ready. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Anna arrived as promised, bringing with her a young woman named Sarah, who Maggie recognized as one of the seamstresses in town. Together, the three women transformed Maggie from a simple school teacher into someone she barely recognized in the mirror. Anna worked magic with her hair, pinning it up in an elaborate style that somehow managed to look both elegant and effortless. The wooden combs from Ethan and Will were placed perfectly, the mother of pearl catching the light. Sarah helped her into the cream-colored dress, doing up what seemed like 1,000 tiny buttons down the back. Martha fluttered around them all, offering commentary and occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Stop crying, Anna ordered without heat. You'll set Maggie off, and then we'll all be crying, and her eyes will be red for the ceremony. I can't help it, Martha sniffled. She came to this town with one carpet bag and a teaching certificate, and now look at her. She's getting married. She's staying. She's found her home. The words made Maggie's own eyes prick with tears, but she blinked them back firmly. No crying. Anna's right. I need to make it through this ceremony without falling apart. You'll make it through just fine, Sarah said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. There, perfect. Mr. Irwin is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you. Maggie turned to look at herself in the full-length mirror Anna had somehow procured, and her breath caught. The woman looking back at her was radiant, not because of the dress or the hair or any external adornment, but because of the joy shining in her eyes. She looked like someone who knew exactly where she belonged and was walking toward that belonging with her whole heart. "I'm getting married," she whispered, and saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I'm really getting married." "Yes, you are," Anna said firmly, "and we need to get moving, or you'll be late to your own wedding." The church was only a short walk from the boarding house, but they took Martha's wagon anyway to keep Maggie's dress from dragging in the dust. As they approached, Maggie could see a crowd gathered outside. Seemingly half the town had turned out, curious to witness the unconventional union of the schoolteacher and the widowed rancher. Her stomach fluttered with nerves. "That's a lot of people." "They're here because they care," Anna said gently. "Well, most of them. Some are probably just nosy, but that's true of any wedding." Inside the church, they found organized chaos. Doc Morrison was acting as usher, directing people to seats. The fiddle player was tuning his instrument in the corner. Reverend Thomas stood at the altar, looking calm and composed in his Sunday best. And there, near the front, stood Ethan and Will. Ethan wore a dark suit Maggie had never seen before, probably borrowed or newly purchased for the occasion. His hair was neatly combed, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked nervous and eager and impossibly handsome. Will stood beside him in his own miniature suit, practically vibrating with excitement. When Will caught sight of Maggie in the doorway, his face split into an enormous grin. He said something to his father, and Ethan turned and went completely still. Even from across the church, Maggie could see the expression on his face. Wonder. Love. A kind of reverent disbelief that made her heart squeeze tight in her chest. She smiled at him, and he smiled back. And in that moment, the whole church full of people ceased to exist. There was only him, only them, only this moment they'd somehow found their way to despite every obstacle. "All right," Anna said briskly, breaking the spell. "Maggie, you wait here with Martha. Everyone else needs to get seated so we can start this thing properly." The next few minutes were a flurry of last-minute adjustments. Anna checked Maggie's hair one more time. Sarah straightened her dress. Martha gripped her hand so tightly it almost hurt. "You're sure?" the older woman asked quietly. "Absolutely certain this is what you want?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Maggie replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The fiddle music began. A simple melody, sweet and clear. It was time. Martha linked her arm through Maggie's, standing in as the closest thing to family Maggie had here. "Ready? Ready?" They began the walk down the aisle, and Maggie was suddenly acutely aware of every eye on her. She saw Mrs. Crawford in the third row, her expression still disapproving, but perhaps slightly softened. She saw the other teachers from surrounding districts who'd traveled to attend. She saw parents of her students, some smiling warmly, others looking curious. She saw Anna beaming from her seat next to Doc Morrison, but mostly she saw Ethan. He stood at the altar watching her approach, and there were tears streaming unashamedly down his face. Will stood beside him, holding a small velvet box that must contain the wedding rings, his own eyes bright with emotion. Father and son, waiting for her, wanting her, choosing her just as surely as she was choosing them. When she reached the altar, Martha placed Maggie's hand in Ethan's and stepped back. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real. "You came," he whispered, so quietly only she could hear. "Did you think I wouldn't?" I was afraid I'd wake up and this would all be a dream." "It's not a dream." She squeezed his hand. "I'm here. I'm real. And I'm not going anywhere." Reverend Thomas cleared his throat, a smile playing at his lips. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Maggie heard herself speaking the vows, heard Ethan's voice, steady despite his tears, promising to love and cherish her. She felt Will press the rings into their hands at the appropriate moment, saw his proud smile when his part was done perfectly. She heard the Reverend pronounce them husband and wife, heard him say the words she'd been waiting for. "You may kiss your bride." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. The church erupted in applause and cheers, but Maggie barely heard them. All she could focus on was Ethan, was the feeling of his lips on hers, was the knowledge that this moment, this man, this life was hers now. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Will launched himself at them, wrapping his arms around them both. "You did it!" he shouted over the noise of the celebrating congregation. "You're married! You're really, really married!" "We really are," Ethan said, pulling his son, their son, into the embrace. "We're a family now, official and everything." The reception at the ranch was already in full swing by the time they arrived. Neighbors had transformed the yard into something magical. Tables laden with food, ribbons strung between trees, wildflowers in every available container. Someone had even built a small wooden platform for dancing. Anna Morrison orchestrated the whole affair with military precision, directing traffic and ensuring everyone had food and drink. She caught Maggie's eye across the crowd and winked, clearly pleased with how everything had come together. "I can't believe all of this," Maggie said, looking around in wonder. "All these people, all this effort." "They love you," Ethan said simply. "Both of you. You've made a place for yourselves here, and this is their way of showing it." The afternoon dissolved into celebration. There was food, so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it. There was music, the fiddle player joined by a guitarist and a man with a harmonica, filling the air with melodies that ranged from tender to raucous. There was dancing. Maggie found herself passed from partner to partner, spun and twirled until she was dizzy with laughter. But always, she found her way back to Ethan, to the solid warmth of his presence, to the way his eyes followed her around the yard, to the smile that seemed permanently fixed on his face. "Happy?" he asked during one of their dances, holding her close despite the upbeat tempo of the music. "Deliriously." She leaned into him, not caring who saw or what they thought. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for this to feel too good to be true. And it just keeps feeling right, like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Will appeared with a surprise. He'd convinced several of the younger children to help him, and together they'd strung a banner across the porch that read, "Welcome home, Mrs. Irwin." "Do you like it?" he asked anxiously, hovering at Maggie's elbow. "I made most of the letters myself. Tommy Henderson helped with the big ones, but I did all the small ones." "It's perfect," Maggie assured him, pulling him close. "Everything about today has been perfect. Even the part where Johnny Fitzgerald's little brother knocked over the punch bowl? Even that." She laughed at the memory of the chaos that had briefly ensued. "It wouldn't be a proper celebration without at least one disaster." As evening fell and guests began to depart, calling out their congratulations and well wishes, Maggie felt exhaustion begin to set in. It had been the longest, most emotionally intense day of her life, and she was running on pure adrenaline at this point. Anna was one of the last to leave, pulling Maggie aside for a private word. "I know you're tired," she said kindly, "but I wanted to tell you something before I go. You've given those two—" She nodded toward where Ethan and Will were saying goodbye to the final stragglers. "Something I wasn't sure they'd ever find again. Hope, joy, a future worth looking forward to. Rebecca would be grateful, I know I am." "Thank you," Maggie said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For the dress, for the help with the wedding, for accepting me into Rebecca's place." "You're not in Rebecca's place," Anna interrupted gently. "You're in your own place. There's a difference. This family is big enough for both of you, one in memory, one in presence. Don't ever think otherwise." After Anna left, after the last wagon had rolled away down the road, the three of them stood in the yard surveying the aftermath of the celebration. Plates and cups littered the tables. Ribbons fluttered in the evening breeze. The banner Will had made swayed gently above the porch. "We should clean up," Maggie said, but without much conviction. "We should go to bed," Ethan countered. "It's been a long day, and the dishes will still be here tomorrow." Will yawned hugely, as if on cue. "Can I stay up a little longer, please? I just want to make sure this is real. That Miss Ellis, He stopped, confused and suddenly shy. "What should I call you now?" Maggie knelt down so they were eye level, taking his hands in hers. You can call me whatever feels right to you, sweetheart. Miss Ellis, Maggie, Ma, any of those are fine. You don't have to decide right now. But I want to decide. Will's face was serious in the lamplight. Because you're my Ma now. Not instead of my other Ma, but another one. Is that okay? Can I have two Ma's? You can have as many as your heart has room for, Maggie assured him, blinking back tears. And I would be honored, so deeply honored, if you wanted to call me Ma. Then that's what I'll call you. Will threw his arms around her neck. Ma, my Ma. I have a Ma again. Ethan had to turn away, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Maggie held Will close, her own tears falling freely now, and over his shoulder she met her husband's eyes. The gratitude and love she saw there needed no words. Eventually, they got Will settled into bed, though he fought sleep valiantly, clearly afraid that if he closed his eyes, this perfect day might disappear like a dream. Sleep, Maggie commanded gently, smoothing his hair back. And when you wake up tomorrow, I'll still be here. I'll be here every morning from now on. Promise? I promise. She and Ethan stood in Will's doorway for a long moment after he finally drifted off, watching the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. I never thought. Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. After Rebecca, I never thought he'd call anyone else Ma. Never thought I'd want him to. Are you all right with it? Maggie asked, suddenly uncertain. I can talk to him. Tell him to keep calling me Miss Ellis if it's too... No. Ethan turned to her, cupping her face in his hands. It's not too anything. It's perfect. You're perfect. This whole day has been perfect, and I keep waiting to wake up and find out it was all a dream. Funny, Maggie said softly. That's exactly what I keep thinking. They stood there in the hallway, holding each other, listening to the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Somewhere outside, a horse whinnied. An owl hooted from the barn. The wind whispered through the pine trees. I should show you our room, Ethan said finally, almost shyly. We moved some things around, tried to make space for your belongings. If you don't like how I arranged it, we can change it. The room that had been Ethan and Rebecca's, that was now Ethan and Maggie's, had indeed been rearranged. Fresh curtains hung at the windows. A new quilt covered the bed. Simple, but beautiful, clearly made with care. A wardrobe stood open and empty, waiting for Maggie's dresses. On the dresser sat a vase of wildflowers and a framed photograph Maggie hadn't seen before. She moved closer to examine it and saw a young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile. Rebecca, clearly, though younger than Maggie had imagined. She was holding a baby Will, and Ethan stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders. I wanted you to know her, Ethan said quietly, coming to stand beside Maggie. Wanted her to be part of this room, this life, even though she's gone. Does that bother you? No. Maggie picked up the photograph, studying the family captured there. I'm glad she's here. Glad Will can see her and remember her. She was part of making you who you are, Ethan. Part of making Will who he is. I wouldn't want to erase that. She set the photograph back down gently, then turned to face her husband. But I'm also glad that we're writing our own story now. One that honors what came before, but isn't trapped by it. Ethan pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. How did I get so lucky? To find love twice in one lifetime. I think... Maggie smiled, thinking of all the twists and turns that had brought her here. I think sometimes the universe gives us second chances when we're brave enough to take them. They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, feeling the weight and wonder of the commitment they'd made. Then Ethan stepped back, suddenly looking nervous. I should let you get ready for bed. Give you some privacy. I can sleep in the spare room tonight if you'd prefer. No pressure. We can take this as slow as you need. Maggie's heart swelled with love for this careful, considerate man. Ethan, we're married. You don't have to sleep in the spare room unless you want to. I don't want to, he admitted. But I also don't want to assume... She stopped his words with a kiss, pouring into it all the love and trust and certainty she felt. When she pulled back, both of them were breathless. No more separate rooms, she said firmly. No more goodbyes at the edge of town. No more wondering or waiting. We're together now, really, truly together. That night, lying in bed beside her husband, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around them, Maggie marveled at how much her life had changed in such a short time. 3 weeks ago, she'd been packing to leave, convinced that duty required her to abandon her happiness. 2 weeks ago, she'd stood in a livery yard and chosen to stay, terrified but certain. 1 week ago, she'd been preparing for a wedding she could barely believe was real. And now she was Mrs. Ethan Irwin, lying beside the man she loved, with a son sleeping peacefully down the hall who'd called her ma with such joy and trust. Now she had a home, a family, a future that stretched out before her full of possibility. "Are you asleep?" Ethan whispered in the darkness. "No, too happy to sleep." She felt him smile against her hair. "Me too. Keep thinking I need to pinch myself to make sure this is real." "It's real." Maggie laced her fingers through his. "We're real. This is our life now." "Our life," he echoed, like he was tasting the words. "I like the sound of that." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, and Maggie felt herself finally beginning to drift towards sleep. But before she could fully surrender to it, Ethan spoke again. "Maggie?" "Thank you for staying, for giving us a chance, for being brave enough to choose us." She turned in his arms to face him, even though the darkness made it hard to see his features. "Thank you for asking me to stay, for giving me a reason to be brave, for loving me enough to let me choose." "Always," he promised. "For the rest of our lives, I'll choose you. Choose us." "Then I guess we're stuck with each other," Maggie said with a smile. "Best thing that ever happened to me, getting stuck with you." The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both new and timeless. Maggie continued teaching, now riding out from the ranch each morning instead of walking from the boarding house. The students adjusted to calling her Mrs. Irwin instead of Miss Ellis, though a few of the younger ones occasionally slipped up. Mrs. Crawford maintained her disapproval, but it had less bite now that the marriage was official and proper. Even she couldn't argue that Maggie was anything but an excellent teacher, and gradually her criticism shifted from Maggie's character to more mundane complaints about the school budget and curriculum. Will flourished. The nightmares that had plagued him since his mother's death became less frequent, then rare, then disappeared entirely. He grew taller, his laughter came more easily, and his reading improved dramatically. One evening he read an entire chapter from one of Maggie's books, without stumbling once, and both she and Ethan had to excuse themselves to the porch to compose themselves. "He's going to be all right," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Really, truly all right." "He is," Maggie agreed, leaning into her husband's embrace. "We all are." The first letter from Clara arrived 6 weeks after the wedding, full of news about the farm, about the children, about the young woman who'd come to help and was proving invaluable. She wrote about missing Maggie, but being happy for her, about wanting to visit soon to meet her new brother-in-law and nephew. "I was wrong to ask you to sacrifice your happiness for my sake," Clara wrote, "but I'm so grateful you found the courage to choose yourself anyway. That's a lesson I hope to teach my own children, that sometimes the most important duty is the one you owe to your own heart." Maggie read the letter aloud to Ethan and Will over supper, and Will immediately began planning for his aunt and cousin's eventual visit. "We'll have to clean the whole house," he declared, "and I'll teach them to ride horses, and we can show them the swimming hole, and you can take a breath," Maggie said with a laugh. "We have plenty of time to plan." As autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, as the first snow dusted the mountain peaks, as the seasons turned and life continued its eternal rhythm, Maggie found herself settling into her role as wife, mother, and teacher with a contentment she'd never known before. There were challenges, certainly. Days when the house felt too small and the work too much. Moments when she missed her old independence or worried she wasn't doing enough. Times when she questioned her choices or feared she'd fail the people depending on her. But those moments were vastly outnumbered by the good ones. By the morning, she woke in Ethan's arms. By the evening, spent reading with Will by the fire. By the Sundays when neighbors stopped by for coffee and conversation. By the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made up a life well lived. One evening in late October, almost 6 months after the wedding, Maggie sat on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Will was doing homework at the kitchen table. Ethan was in the barn, finishing evening chores. The air was crisp with the promise of coming winter, and somewhere in the distance, geese honked as they flew south. Ethan emerged from the barn and crossed the yard to join her on the swing, settling beside her with a contented sigh. "Good day?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Perfect day. And it had been, in all the ways that mattered. Her students had been engaged and eager, supper had turned out well. Will had laughed so hard at something Ethan said that he'd nearly fallen off his chair. Small moments, perhaps, but they added up to something profound. "I was thinking," Ethan said slowly, "about what you said on our wedding day, about writing our own story. What about it? I think we're doing it, writing something new, something good." He paused, then added quietly, "Rebecca would be happy, that we're happy, that Will's happy. I think so too." Maggie leaned into him, savoring the warmth and solidity of his presence. "And I think she'd be glad we didn't let fear stop us from living." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge, sharp and bright against the darkening sky. From inside the house, they heard Will call out that he'd finished his homework, and could he please have dessert now? "Duty calls," Ethan said with a smile, but neither of them moved immediately. They sat there a moment longer, reluctant to break the spell of the peaceful evening. "Ethan?" Maggie said softly. "Yes?" "Do you remember what Will said that first night, when he was trying to convince me to stay? He said a lot of things that night. He said if I left, he'd never sleep again." She looked up at her husband. "Do you think he still feels that way? That he needs me that desperately?" Ethan considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally. "I think he's secure enough now that he'd survive if something happened. He'd grieve, but he'd survive." He tightened his arm around her. "But I also think he'll never forget that you stayed. That when he needed someone most, when he was most afraid of being left behind, you chose him. That's a gift that will shape the rest of his life." "I hope so," Maggie said. "I hope he always knows how much he's loved, how much you both are loved." "We know." Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Trust me, Maggie. We know." Will's voice came again from inside, more insistent now. "Ma, Pa, are you coming? I'm starving." They laughed and stood, Ethan offering his hand to help Maggie up from the swing. Together they walked toward the house, toward the light spilling from the windows, toward the sound of their son's voice calling them home. As they reached the porch, Maggie paused and looked back at the valley spread out below them, at the land that had become hers, at the life she'd built, at the future she'd chosen. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, standing at a window with a packed carpet bag, convinced she had to leave. She thought about the choice she'd made, the courage it had taken, the fear she'd had to overcome. And she thought about what she'd tell that woman if she could go back. That sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is stay. That sometimes choosing yourself isn't selfish but necessary. That sometimes the life you're running toward has been waiting right where you are all along. "Coming?" Ethan asked from the doorway, his hand extended toward her. "Yes," Maggie said, taking his hand, letting him pull her inside. "I'm coming home." And she was. She really, finally was. The door closed behind them, shutting out the night, holding in the warmth and light and love. Inside, Will was already dividing up the apple cake Martha had brought by that afternoon, giving himself what was clearly the largest slice until Maggie raised an eyebrow at him, and he sheepishly adjusted the portions. They ate dessert at the kitchen table, talking about nothing and everything. Will's plans for a tree fort, Ethan's ideas for expanding the garden next spring, Maggie's hopes for starting a lending library at the school. Ordinary conversation about ordinary things, made extraordinary by the simple fact that they were together. Later, after Will was tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Maggie and Ethan sat by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his fingers playing absently with her hair. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Giving up your independence, tying yourself to us?" "Never," Maggie said without hesitation. "Do you regret asking me to stay?" "Never," he echoed. "You're the best thing that's happened to us. To me." "We're the best thing that's happened to me," she replied. "All of this, the ranch, the family, the life we're building together. It's everything I didn't know I needed." The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of coming snow. The world turned on its axis, indifferent to the small dramas of human hearts. But here in this house, in this moment, everything felt aligned. "I love you," Ethan said quietly. "In case I don't say it enough." "You say it plenty," Maggie assured him, "but I never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I plan to keep saying it for the next 50 years or so." "Only 50? She smiled against his shoulder. "Seems a bit short." "You're right, better make it forever, just to be safe." Forever sounds perfect. They sat there until the fire burned low, reluctant to end the day, to surrender this perfect moment to sleep and the inevitable demands of tomorrow. But eventually, Ethan banked the coals and Maggie extinguished the lamps, and together they climbed the stairs to their room. As Maggie settled into bed beside her husband, feeling his warmth beside her, hearing Will's soft breathing from down the hall, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Gratitude for the courage she'd found to stay. Gratitude for the love that had welcomed her. Gratitude for this life she'd chosen, with all its imperfections and challenges and extraordinary ordinary moments. She thought of the stagecoach that had pulled away without her all those months ago, carrying other people toward other destinations. She'd watched it disappear into the distance and felt relief, not regret. And every day since had only confirmed that she'd made the right choice. This was where she belonged, not because it was easy or safe or what she'd planned, but because it was hers, because she'd chosen it with her whole heart. Because love, real, deep, transformative love, was always worth the risk. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Ethan's voice was already heavy with approaching sleep. "For giving me a reason to stay. For showing me what home feels like. For—" She paused, searching for the right words. "For being my forever." His arm tightened around her. "Always, Maggie. Always." And as she drifted off to sleep, wrapped in her husband's embrace, with her son safe down the hall and a tomorrow full of possibility waiting, Maggie Ellis Irwin understood something fundamental about the nature of courage and choice and love. Sometimes the greatest adventure isn't about going somewhere new. Sometimes it's about staying exactly where you are and building something beautiful from the ashes of fear and duty and expectation. Sometimes it's about looking at the life you've stumbled into and saying yes. Yes to love. Yes to family. Yes to the messy, complicated, perfect reality of choosing your own happiness. She'd been terrified that morning when she'd chosen to stay. Terrified of making the wrong choice, of disappointing people, of risking everything for something that might not work out. But it had worked out. Better than she'd ever dreamed possible. And now, lying in the darkness with her future secure and her heart full, Maggie understood the truth that would guide the rest of her days. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is stay. And sometimes staying is just another word for coming home.